out-of-state fee, but they are able to go to college. That we want to make sure that you know about student protections, including AB 469. My colleague Maria Blanco will be talking about that in a little bit more detail, and I know the speakers in the opening session touched on that as well. And then really kind of give you some tools to support a spectrum of undocumented students and think about different ways for individuals to pay for college with or without DACA. Excuse me, with or without AB 540 of the California DREAM Act. We're going to do this super quick welcome, just kind of go over to create a common understanding from some terms, talk about the benefits and challenges of AB 469, and then provide you some resources. We were asked to specifically speak today about students who are citizens but have parents who are undocumented, T and U visa holders, and individuals with TPS, and then what's available for students that don't have AB 540 or the California DREAM Act. How can they make their way in or be available? What services are available for them now? So just a quick little bit about myself. I work for Immigrants Rising. My name is Nancy Judaitis. I'm the Director of Higher Education, and I'm really working now to try to do institutional support and trainings to be able to increase a more welcoming and accessible campus climate. I've done a lot of research, I've created a lot of educational materials, but my heart really comes to this also from a social justice activist and as a former financial aid counselor and pre-admissions advisor. I'm really lucky to be here with Maria Blanco. I hope that she has also been able to get into the waiting room. Maria, are you here? Okay. If she's not here yet, then she is an amazing individual who's the director of the Immigrant Legal Resource Services Center. She's the founding director. She was also instrumental in the passage of AB 540, and you can see some of the areas of expertise in law that she has, which are, it's a pleasure and an honor to always work with her, and she's always advocating for undocumented students and immigrants within California and within the UC. So I'm going to get started just in terms of trying to create a common understanding and just really thinking about when you say the term undocumented, what is it that we mean? At Immigrants Rising, when we're talking about undocumented, we're talking about individuals who entered without inspection, across the border without permission. There's actually those who entered with a legal status but overstayed their status. Individuals who we also are considering deferred action for childhood arrivals. We kind of put them in that umbrella in terms of that they don't have a path towards legal citizenship. And so they are eligible also for the California DREAM Act, although they do have a stay of deportation and work authorization. And then individuals who are sort of in that liminal space in the process of legalizing. And then vulnerable individuals with TPS, T or U visa holders who are, that has really sort of been in flux, especially TPS with the recent changes to immigration policy. Also just thinking about how many undocumented high school seniors are graduating at each year. For many, many years, we thought that was just about 65,000 through the Pew Research, but recently the Migration Policy Institute came out and showed that there's actually 98,000 students each year who are graduating, who are undocumented and graduating. That doesn't count for those who stop out or did not graduate, that have not had access to DACA. And most importantly for today's conversation, 1/3 of them actually live in California. The part that I also think is thinking about, like if we're thinking about the undocumented population in California, there's just over 3 million that are in California. There are if you look at the census data from those who are in the ages of 16 to 24, there's about 400,000. But when you look at how many individuals are actually enrolled in California colleges and universities who are, quote, college age, right? We know many.
I'm on here, but I can't
college
see
age.
it. Oh, okay.
That we think about, there's actually only about just over 20% of college age undocumented youth who are attending college in California. So the work of all of us, I think, is so important in terms of how can we make sure not everybody has to go to college, but everybody who wants to go to college should be able to go. So how can we kind of raise that number of college age undocumented youth attending in California? And the other thing I just wanted to talk about also was thinking about the diversity of undocumented students. If you look at these numbers, the number of undocumented students, yes, about half of those are Hispanic. These are their terms, Hispanic or Latino Latine students, but 25%, 1/4 of those are Asian or Asian Pacific Islanders, 12% are Black undocumented students, and 12% are white undocumented students, and then a small portion of others. So I say this because I think it's really important when we're thinking about that, that we're not just talking to one portion of the room. We're thinking that students have to look a certain way in order to be undocumented. So recognizing that diversity. And for that reason, I think it's so important that we just make this information available to all students and don't require them to out themselves to get the information from us. And then, Maria, are you here?
Yeah, I am.
Thank you, Maria. So I'm gonna, Maria, do you want to just do a quick minute to introduce yourself and let me?
Sure. I'm sorry. We had some problems getting on, and I'm sorry. I apologize if I'm late. I'm Maria Blanco. I'm the director of the UC Immigrant Legal Services Center, which is a center within the University of California that provides immigration legal services to undocumented students throughout the university at all the campuses. We have 10 attorneys and a staff of 16. And it's from that position that I think a lot of the knowledge on this topic comes for me. So I wanted to talk about AB 469 and whether you are familiar with it or not. I think it's brand new. It hasn't gone into effect, but I wanted to go over some of the components of AB 469 and what it means for undocumented students. So to follow up on Nancy's presentation, really the thinking behind AB 469 is to increase knowledge about financial aid in order to encourage students to apply for financial aid and therefore increase the possibility that they can attend higher ed. What the folks behind this legislative bill knew, as Nancy also pointed out, is that a lot of money gets left on the table every year with people that don't apply either for FAFSA, for Cal Grants, or for the California DREAM Act. So the idea behind this bill was to really requires the school districts or the legal educational institutions to make FAFSA and DREAM Act information available to all students and also to get them to fill out the forms. So that's the purpose behind the bill. If you can go to the next slide. So what it does is it requires whatever the different educational institution you're talking about, it requires that the school district make sure that every 12th grader submits a financial aid application form. And unless you have to opt out, which is interesting. So it's not optional. What you have to do is opt out if you do not want to fill out a financial aid application. I think this is a really important requirement. I think it forces school districts to not leave some people behind and make assumptions about who should apply or who can apply, or selectively provide information about financial aid to only folks that they think are quote unquote college material. So this requirement, I think, could be hopefully a great equity bill. Next slide. So the program right now is, the legislation is now being implemented with a lot of different things. One of the things that it's developing is the opt-out form that would have to be filled out if the student does not want to fill out the form. The other thing is, and I will explain why, it also is going to elaborate when they issue the regulations on who are some nonprofit entities that can actually help students fill out the financial aid form. And if they don't want to do it through a school counselor, the school will be required to make another entity available to the student who prefers to do it through somebody else. Next slide. So you can see the benefits I've talked about. We're hoping that it will increase awareness of aid to students, that it is part of the education. So you are required to do this if you're a student, a 12th grader. You know, with this financial aid, obviously more resources are available to the students. And what the ultimate goal is that we really increase the application rates for financial aid, and therefore ultimately to higher education. I want to talk about the challenges though. When this bill was first introduced and made it out of committee in Sacramento, it did not have an opt-out provision, and it didn't have the third-party application support. And our concern, and it had punitive measures in it for students who did not fill out a financial aid application form. Our concern was, with the bill as it was initially written, is that the students had to ask either for a DREAM Act application or for a FAFSA, and in so doing, that they would be outing themselves and their family's immigration status. And while in some parts of the state, school districts are well-versed, are sympathetic, they're allies to undocumented students, there are a lot of parts of the state that where the schools or the county departments of education or even administrators in different schools are hostile to undocumented students. So also we were concerned that a lot of school districts and the people that might be helping students file these applications as part of the curriculum don't really know a lot about who's eligible for FAFSA, who's not, how that relates to immigration status, and they are not familiar with AB 5 with the DREAM Act scholarships, and the fact that you have to be AB 540, and they may not even really understand what AB 540 is. So these are some of the challenges. I think the bill now contains a lot of provisions to help with some of the privacy concerns for undocumented students and their families. But the part about lack of knowledge in some school districts about DREAM Act is still, I think, an issue that can't be resolved through the legislation. It's something we have to resolve. Next slide. So here, here are some things I think that since this bill will be implemented, it'll go into effect in September with the school year. And I think one of the things to really look out for is that whether it's the counselors at a school, the principals, the county, the Board of Education, whoever is at some level very high up or even at a direct level responsible for implementing 469, very familiar with it, and not just in the overall sense. The bill has a lot of small provisions that I described, the opt-out, et cetera. So education and familiarity with 469 is going to become very important. Students have to be reassured, and it has to be a real, actual reassurance that their information is protected by law. And as you know, we do have California law that protects immigration status information from federal ICE and from other enforcement agencies, but students and their families are always concerned, and so we have to really work at building that trust and informing them about their privacy. However this rolls out at the school level, there has to be a lot of thought given to how do you differentiate who's eligible for DREAM Act scholarships and who's not for FAFSA without outing students in a public way. So that's going to be very, not only do we not want to out them because of repercussions potentially with enforcement, but also they may be in a hostile school district, and it's really important to protect them. The other thing is, I think there's going to be a lot of confusion about what happens if somebody doesn't fill out the financial aid forms. Like I said, originally you were going to be retained and not allowed to graduate if you didn't do it. We have cleaned that up so that there isn't a punitive repercussion. But I think in practice, there may be school districts that go about enforcing this bill in a way that that feels negative to the students who have questions or don't want to complete it. The other thing is, of course, you know, the school districts, we always tell them they have to stay up to date with the DREAM Act requirements. And also begin building the partnerships with the nonprofits that the bill envisions can help students fill out the forms, because I think we should really make sure that the students, that the schools know who are the nonprofits,
Okay.
approach them and help them understand why they're sending some students to them for filling out the form. So
Yes.
but this has to
I will
start now
definitely
and
reach
not
out to
just
the
in
student.
September.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Call you, right?
I'm
Okay.
I'm hearing somebody speaking. Is somebody on the phone?
Okay, I will do that. Thank you, Elena. Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I was listening to another conversation. And then if you're in a position where you are implementing or monitoring the implementation, do not share. All that needs to happen is for people to know that an application for financial aid was filled out, and it doesn't matter which form. And the other thing is to stay connected to networks of people that are working on this issue, and are, as this rolls out, can begin to talk about what's working, what's not working, and refine AB 469 implementation. Next slide. The next two slides are just reminders in terms of the protection of the data. You have the Federal Privacy Act, then you have the California Values Act, and then AB 21. Both the state laws were passed under the Trump administration by our state legislature and signed by the governor. And this was explicitly to make sure that any information school districts and higher education institutions have about a student's immigration status, that it not be shared, not be disclosed, and that if there's any problem with immigration enforcement approaching a school district, that there be somebody at the both the K through 12 and the higher ed level that is responsible for following up on any approach by immigration officers. Next slide. Finally, again, this was under, you know, under the Trump administration. All the three segments in different ways issued statements to their campus community, students, administrators, faculty, about what their obligations were, what the rights of the students were, how they should handle any immigration enforcement on their campus. And this was actually meant to really reassure the students that the campuses and people, immigration can come on site, that is very different than any information sharing. And so these are I want to say that the higher ed institutions adopted this very quickly and of their own volition, and I think have really done a good job of reassuring students that the institutions are protected areas for students. Next slide. So that's a lot in a very short time, and I want to take questions or hear from you about ideas about how 469, even concerns as you hear what the requirements are and how it is, some of the opt-outs, etc. Questions or comments or ideas you may have about AB 469. So I don't know if you want to do this now, or we should take questions and comments about the entire 2 presentations before we.
I'd say let's do this now, Maria, just because it's a lot of good but dense information, and people might have questions right now about 469.
Yeah, okay,
let's do it. Or raise your hand, unmute.
Yeah. I can't.
Thank you, Leighton. There was a question about T and U visa holders. I know Nancy was answering questions in the chat too as we were going. So there was a question about the visas, and also how will I be able to track the students' progress on the FAFSA and DREAM Act as a counselor?
My understanding about how individuals would track would kind of be through that race to submit area that individuals can already track which applications have been submitted. But I'm not sure if there's been regulations put out exactly about how would you know about who's opted out. I think, who's opted out, or is there going to be any updates to that? My sense is that that's going to come out this summer, in the next couple of months. But Maria, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I don't think we know yet. And the summer is when they're going to be fleshing out the regulations before the implementation in September. And I think that people who deal with this on a daily basis at the high school level in particular should really track what's going on with the regulations in order to make sure that they really reflect the way things work on the ground, like exactly these kind of questions. How can I track? How can I track who submitted, but also how does this information get sent in other words, how to show compliance with the new law. All of those things are things that will be hammered out in the regs, and I think you all know that that's really, the regs is really where a lot of the details about stuff like this needs to be worked out in a way that really makes it less complicated. On the one hand, less complicated for those implementing the law, but at the same time takes into account the nuances and the complexity of students, for example, mixed status family students, etc. So I would say that it's going to be really important to track the work of the regulations. I see a question. I don't know that this is really about financial aid. And so I don't know that this was really the issue of support for refugees isn't per se the thrust of the bill. Let me put it this way. The bill is not really about support systems for immigrant students in the K through 12 or in the high school environment. It really was a very limited bill to deal with trying to increase the number of students who apply for financial aid.
I do know, Maria, that there was a bill that came out, AB 343, which talked about special immigrant visas. So I'd encourage that individual to take a look into that, to have more pieces. And And then there's a question about how individuals are going to, if they adjust their status, sort of like what would happen. So I think that just given time and such, it would make sense to transition to that. But if we have other, is there another question, Maria, that you see specifically about this?
No, I'm scrolling. I see a question here that says, what are the restrictions for DACA applicants? And maybe whoever, Journey, I'm not sure I understand that question.
I mean, right now, I just, like individuals not being able to apply for DACA, the Texas court case is going on, but I would say that, do you have a website, perhaps, Maria, that you could share about what's going on with DACA right now that we could, maybe from United We Dream or someone that they could?
Well, United We Dream has a good website, National Immigration Law Center. The restrictions for DACA, let me see if I understand this question. The California DREAM Act scholarship is limited to persons with AB 540 status. Now, you can have AB 540 status and have DACA or not have DACA, right? As long as you meet the requirements of AB 540, the years of high school, with all the amendments that have been made over the last few years, DACA is not the criteria for the California DREAM Act. It's really that criteria about credits and high school years, etc. So I think, it's important to not conflate AB 540 for purposes of the DREAM Act and DACA.
Right, that makes sense. And I just threw in the chat a resource that Immigrants Rising created that talks about the difference between AB 540, in-state tuition, California DREAM Act, and DACA. And like Maria said, DACA is not required for individuals who would be applying through AB 469. So I know we only have a little bit less time, but I just wanted to say that despite some of these concerns, despite some of the restrictions, we do think it's really important also for individuals just to remember that every day undocumented young people are continuing to go to school, showing resilience and innovation in the face of many educational, legal, and political challenges. And so I know all of you who are here today are committed to ensuring that we can support their educational and career and many other community goals that they have. I'm going to be talking just a little bit about financial aid and in-state tuition in California. I do think that one thing that I'd really love for everyone to take away today, this is really important with 469, but everywhere, is to never just talk about FAFSA, always talk about FAFSA or DREAM. So that when you talk about like financial aid applications, we're going to be doing the FAFSA or the DREAM application, because this just raises awareness, and also people are listening for cues. So I think that's a really important piece of things. We have this great resource which just talks about what are the differences between FAFSA versus DREAM. And I know a question came in the chat about like, what if somebody changes their status? This document will also help students if they applied, let's say that they didn't have their status come through yet for being eligible for FAFSA, but then it came through after they turned in the DREAM Act application. On here, there's actually an application conversion form, a link that you can also find on the CSAC website, so that individuals can actually switch out the applications based on their status. Or if someone were to turn in the wrong application, this also helps you figure out what the steps for their financial aid office would be to take out one, like perhaps take out the FAFSA if it was done by error and put in the DREAM, or take out the DREAM if their status has been adjusted and bring in the FAFSA. So that can be really helpful.
And I really encourage people to look at all these materials and have them, because unfortunately, not all admissions and financial aid offices are equally informed about all these things. Like a question like that, what happens if you adjust your status, right? And you had DREAM and now you're eligible for FAFSA. It's an area that we hear all the time, that people go to their financial aid office and they're met with blank looks or they are given incorrect information. And so unfortunately, that means that those of us that work in this space we have to become familiar with this and be able to have resources that we can make available, informational resources that we can make available. Because there is a lot of, to this day, a lot of misinformation.
Still, right. Yeah, we just did the 20-year anniversary of AB 540, right? And which is a requirement for the California DREAM Act. And there's still lots of confusion moving forward. Also just confusion, I think, about residency for tuition purposes versus legal permanent residency, right? Those are two separate things, and Immigrants Rising also has a resource to talk about that. Thinking just quickly, like there are multiple pathways to college. I know a lot of you today are here from high school, but if your students don't have the full 3 years from high school, how could they maybe tap into an adult school, a non-credit school, or credit school courses by being able to, with options to be able to pay resident fees, and I'll talk about those in a sec. I do think that we have a great resource that just talks about the new AB 540, which is AB 540 or SB 68, which now allows students to be able to take adult school classes, community college classes, and use, they don't graduate from high school, they could use their associate's degree or minimum transfer requirements. We don't have time to go over all the pieces. This presentation is in the Schedule application already, but it talks about like what are the actual requirements for each. If students don't meet eligibility for AB 540, there are some community colleges that actually allow students to pay resident fees if they take 6 units or less. Not all community colleges do this, but you could contact your community college, because if students don't meet AB 540, which is the requirement to go into the California DREAM Act, how can we get them on the pathway so that they will? One option is this AB 540. Another option is SB 554. This is a law that actually allows students who are in adult school or non-credit adult school programs to actually be able to do the same as concurrent students would do and take community college classes, even if they don't meet eligibility for AB 540 yet. So 76-140 and AB 5 and SB 554 are pathways in to AB 540 for students that don't meet that yet. Oops. I think it's, and the presentation that I talked about is also linked to the laws and the resources that we're showing. Someone was asking about T and U visa status, as well as TPS, which is temporary protective status. U visa and TPS holders can actually apply for the California DREAM Act. But they might be classified as residents because they have a legal presence. They don't have a legal status, but they have a legal presence where they can start to do, okay, did I have my 366 days? Was I here and planning to stay? Are they financially independent from their parents? The implication is if they were to be classified as residents, they can pay resident fees. And that's great, except state-based financial aid is only available if they are eligible for AB 540. So a student, if they have a T or U or TPS status, would actually need to do extra steps with admissions and financial aid to make sure that they could document their eligibility for AB 540 and have their financial aid released. And then also just thinking about students who are citizens, but whose parents are undocumented. Students who are citizens have the eligibility to be able to apply for FAFSA and receive FAFSA. However, their parents cannot sign the FAFSA with an FSA ID. So what they would do is put zeros in for their social security number. It's going to ask them to check it and be like, are you sure? They would say, yes, I'm sure. And then they would fill out a paper signature page and turn in the paper signature page because to make sure that the application was considered complete. And we have a resource specifically for students that are referred to as mixed status families to be able to figure out how can they make sure not only that they pay resident fees, but that they get federal and state-based financial aid to make sure that they're accurately classified. And then I wanted to talk about scholarships, especially for students that don't meet eligibility for AB 540. As I said in the beginning, and as our presentation says, all undocumented students can go to college. But if you don't meet eligibility for AB 540, you'd be paying out-of-state fees and you wouldn't have eligibility for financial aid. But there are scholarships, and I've met many students that have traveled this path. It's a hard path, but I think it's really important for us to know about these options. And Immigrants Rising does have a database of hundreds of scholarships that do not require proof of citizenship. I also saw in the chat that someone said Sally Mae has that as well. But I think we have vetted all of these scholarships. We're making sure that they don't require proof of citizenship. Many of them don't have any kind of other additional requirements. So just looking at merit or area of study. So definitely look at, we have scholarships for graduate and undergraduate students. And also thinking about, you can find those, we have a searchable database now where you can actually go in and look by date, sort it by high school senior, a freshman, sophomore from the IE, and then other additional scholarship databases student could find. But I think in terms of looking at the scholarships, it's important also to be thinking about how can we demystify the application process, right? Many scholarships do not require proof of citizenship, even if many others do. They're not just awarded based on grades, but community service, your major, class level. And always I try to tell students, if scholarship's $1,000, even if it takes you 10 hours to write that scholarship application, you get $100 an hour, right? And Immigrants Rising hosts IG Lives and others to talk about that. And we have a scholarship search chart and a way to help students build their scholarship essays to be able to make sure that they have the tools that they need to apply for scholarships successfully. Let me just look in the chat here real quick. As someone was saying, I know laws differ from state to state. What would you recommend for a student who wants to go out of state school? So it's true, if the student meets eligibility for AB 540 here, they're not going to necessarily meet eligibility for in-state tuition at the school that they go to, but there's an excellent website, which is the higher education portal, which is a national portal, and they talk about the rules for every different state as to what they're up to in terms of what those eligibility requirements would be. And for somebody's asking about a parent signature page, what if a parent lives in another country? Based on the law, the way that it is now, even if a parent lives in another country, they are required still to find some way to get that signature page signed and turn that into FAFSA. California DREAM Act allows students to actually be able to use a code, like I forgot what it's called, but a PIN. And so that PIN, sometimes students can talk on the phone with their parents, but the FSAI, the FAFSA signature page actually requires a actual signature. And then I just wanted to see if there's any time for questions and comments. We know that was a bit of a wham bam tour because we did start a little bit later. We're really grateful for all of you being here today. You can definitely contact Maria and myself. This is our contact information. We're grateful for the work that you're doing. I definitely encourage you to look on the schedule for the platform that there is. We've listed both of these presentations as well as many of the resources that are mentioned. And within the presentation, all of the resources that I talked about are linked. I'm wondering, Maria, do you see any other questions that we should be addressing before we let people go?
No. I think we've covered them. If we didn't answer them, it's because they didn't fall within the topic, but I think we've covered all the questions.
Okay. Well, we want to thank everybody. And I see one more question that
yeah, it was just one more question. Let's see on.
Yeah, it says, if a student is currently working on ESL classes to be eligible for AB 540, will they be able to submit the CADA after the deadline? So I definitely encourage students, when you don't have to have all of your AB 540 classes done before you apply to the college, and you don't need to have all of your AB 540 hours done before you apply to the DREAM Act. You should definitely try to apply by that March 2nd deadline. There is a September 2nd deadline for the California community colleges. So if they miss that March 2nd deadline, they could definitely still try to get in on the September 2nd deadline. But it definitely is, as soon as you have the eligibility to apply, you just show the proof before the very first day of school.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks, everyone. We hope you have a great rest of your conference. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for all that you're up to. Thank you to Maria for that really powerful and legal interpretation of 469, and for your advocacy in making sure that it's more available for undocumented students and meeting their protection and needs.
And Nancy, Immigrants Rising always has such amazing information. Really, you all are so lucky to have Immigrants Rising with all these resources.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.